Greetings. It's real difficult to talk about reparations without talking about police reform. The United States ranks in the top 10 nations in the world for police killings of its citizens. We have over 2 million people incarcerated in jails and prisons throughout the country. We have about 6 million people on probation and parole. We criminalize drug and alcohol addiction and mental health problems. We stand out in the world of having one of the most repressive systems on earth when it comes to the way certain segments of the population are treated. America is sixth behind Brazil, Venezuela, the Philippines, India, and Syria in police killings. It ranks with Nigeria, El Salvador, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Most of us recognize the names of Black Americans killed by police, such as George Floyd or Rayshard Brooks, Philandro Castile, Breonna Taylor, Freddie Gray, Eric Gardner, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, and the list goes on and on. It's so long it has resulted in calls for police reform and an impassioned plea to defund the police, to stop them from killing Black people. Today, let's start a national discussion on police reform. What do we know? How do we stop police killings and improve the quality of life in our communities? The nations with the lowest crime rates in the industrialized world, such as Japan, Finland, and Norway, also have the lowest number of police killings of their citizens. These nations also have two other major things in common. First, each require police officers to complete at least 2 years of training before they are put on the street and exposed to citizens, as compared to 6 months in the United States. Police in those countries are eminently more highly qualified and are held to a higher professional standard. Second, these countries have more equitable wealth distribution and greater income equality than does the United States. When we talk about police reform and we look at some of those countries that are doing really well, what we find is they have a crime prevention driven system as opposed to an arrest and incarceration system. In the United States, we have an arrest and incarceration system. You know, if we look at the crime prevention driven systems, those countries place a lot of their resources in activities for youth, in assuring that people are getting mental health services and making sure that people are getting services to eliminate drug and alcohol addiction. They're working to address some of the social evils that drive people into crime. And there's income equality. There's a greater, more equitable distribution of the wealth. And so people aren't so desperate and in poverty and suffering. You know, they don't zone out and, you know, become involved in drugs and then crime because, you know, they're living outdoors or they're in, you know, some really painful and devastating social condition, or they're witnessing police brutality and injustice on a regular basis. So the crime prevention driven systems, you know, focus on providing skills and training for youth. It involves engaging them in various types of activities, that are positive, whether it be sports or uh, games of strategy like chess and understanding the things of the mind, um, learning martial arts, developing physical as well as mental skills that build confidence and also instill values so that these young people are committed to their nation, and to commit crimes, um, would be, uh, something that they don't do because of their commitment to their community. Well, crime prevention programs focus on cultivating that type of behavior. It focuses on cultivating that type of mentality in the community by making it a more equitable place and opportunities for everyone. And it also creates such a tight-knit community. For example, the like in Japan, for example, they have a National Crime Prevention Association with chapters in every local community. And if a stranger comes in the community, that person's greeted and welcomed. It's like, what's your name? Who are your parents? Where are you from? When you have that type of outreach um, in your community and community involvement because of the culture you create, those people that would come in are not likely to come in and commit a crime because they come in and they just told you their name, they told you where they're from. The community knows all about you. And in America, a stranger comes in the community and people close their doors. They hide. Um, they withdraw. They don't greet, and they don't reach out. And this is a cultural phenomenon that has happened uh, over time because of the culture that is developed in this country. Let's talk about the arrest-driven culture. It actually grows out of the slave catchers. When slavery ended, police systems developed all across the country, first with local sheriffs and then developed into police departments whose primary function was to manage the newly freed slaves. And they used fear and intimidation tactics. They imposed the order of segregation of Jim Crow system. Um, so police became the enforcers of Jim Crow. They became the people who were going to go out and arrest people so that they can get free labor by putting people into chain gangs. Um, they developed a mentality they would rather see, uh, you know, um, a million Black people who were not guilty go to jail rather than to let one guilty one go free. That kind of became part of the philosophy in policing. And so when you began to look at how the culture of police developed, there was a time when white officers uh, could arrest anyone, but if a Black officer, once they began to allow some Black people in, that Black officer not only was paid less, but that Black officer couldn't arrest white people. They could only arrest people in the Black community. And so when we start looking at this whole system, it was a system that was developed in unfairness, and it was targeted and focused on Black people, on extracting money from Black people, controlling the Black community, putting Black people in jail in order to generate revenue, and being able to charge fines and fees against Black people, so that Black people then would be forced into a situation where they were helping to finance um, these jobs that primarily were for white people at the time. So let's just be real about the system and how it developed. And then it developed a union system so that they entrenched white supremacy. And that's why when you look at, you see unfairness going on, and it's defended by police unions. You got obvious murders taking place, and the police union speaks up against the people and speaks up in support of exonerating the police officer, who did it on camera. And so that's the explanation for why you're seeing those things with your own eyes, right? And so in order to change the system, we're going to have some major reform of how police unions are worked and who's running these police unions. And as part of this whole training process, we've got to screen out the white supremacists. We've got to identify them and eject them from the system. That's the only thing that's going to work, you know. And so, in terms of looking at, um, you know, in more enlightened countries, you know, there's usually a minimum of 2 years of training. Some are even longer, and most have some continuing education. So there's a much higher professional standard because the police interact with the community. You know, not in the sense that they're, you know, riding around with guns and being threatening, or, you know, grabbing, you know, black youth and slamming them on the hood of the car, or committing um, terrorism basically in black neighborhoods. Um, you know, it's a different type of system that evolves out of a more enlightened police officer. I mean, what we're getting people that just got out of the military, and they want, you know, to be able to go into black neighborhoods and control them because they have been fed a bunch of myths about crime, and believe that all black youth are potential criminals. I mean, you had the former head of the Justice of Juvenile Delinquency, Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, Alfred Rignery, under the Reagan administration, said that the typical criminal was a 14-year-old black male, um, and, you know, talked about, you know, that person was usually from a single parent home, that their mother had several lovers during, you know, a short period of time, and that this child had been abused. And he's dangerous, potentially dangerous, usually a member of a gang, and possibly in possession of weapons. And so this was the profile that was given out across the nation. So every police officer, and most white people in white communities, they shut their door if they saw a 14-year-old black male going. But the police would approach that person and automatically assume they're a criminal and slam them up against their car, and search them and shake them down and threaten them, you know, for information. This is the type of environment that was created and how we got to where we are in terms of the police killings and having people that are protesting. Um, we've got to reform and change this system. And we can change this system by changing, uh, you know, the laws. Federal monies that come into states and cities, you know, municipalities and police departments, they can shift the focus away from being an arrest and incarceration driven system to a crime prevention system. The Congress can do that with with the federal money that it allocates across this nation to support police. They can require continuing education for police officers, for existing officers, and new officers coming in the system, so that they are getting the equivalent of the minimum of 2 years training, and plus have requirements for continuing education, so that they're learning about cultures and communities. They're understanding the background that I'm telling you about now, you know, and they know how to become involved in the community. Because what happens is now, if you look at what happens, you have police officers, they come in the neighborhood, you know, they do the beat down on the black kid and lock him up, you know, and that's it. But a white kid can do the same type of crime, usually something juvenile or foolish or whatever, and the officer will take that kid home because he's a little white kid, and take that kid to his parents and talk to him and explain to them, you know, things that will help them um, rethink their future, and you know, and even provide mentorship and support, and make sure that person can get, you know, some mental health counseling if they need it, or make sure that that person can get drug or alcohol counseling if they need it, or they'll make sure that, you know, that person can get some mentorship if they need it. And they will take white kids under their wing. They will implement a social structure in place that will help um, facilitate that child being successful, and that child not going back into the system or committing additional crimes. But in the black community, that doesn't happen because it's not driven by the law enforcement. The law enforcement has no mercy. They're looking to just lock them up and throw away the key, and to label them as early as they possibly can. At one point, it was to help prevent them from being able to vote and have any political power. It was to create a record for them, a criminal record, so to reduce the competition that they would be against whites for jobs. If we began to analyze what happened and what has been happening and look at the system for what it is, major reforms are needed. And I just wanted to open up this discussion today so that we can begin to talk about it. Because, when we talk about reparations and we talk about our African Holocaust, this is part of our African Holocaust. This is part of what we've experienced. And under the Obama administration, there were probably 100 consent orders between the Justice Department and local police agencies. And they did a study, for example, in Ferguson. They did studies in over 100 different cities. But for example, Ferguson pretty much is Ferguson, Missouri, is very typical of what they found all over the country. And that is that the police targeted the Black community. They racially profiled them for the purpose of extracting fines and fees, and that the local court system and the local government were usually willing participants in this process. And it's a tradition that has gone back for many years and is rooted in how this whole system was founded and emerged. And so let's talk about it. We need to talk about it. And we need to talk about what we can do to bring about reform, because police reform and reparations go hand in hand. I mean, when you have countries like Norway and Japan, I mean, the average family has $30,000 in savings at one point. And when you begin to look at, the lack of poverty, there are just so many more opportunities for young people when they're not growing up in poverty. When you have a more equal distribution of the wealth here in the United States, everything is shifted in favor of the very wealthy. And, you have poor people that can't get health care. They have difficulty getting health care. They have difficulty getting access to mental health services. They have difficulty getting access to drug or alcohol counseling. They have difficulty getting access to just some of the basic services that are free and open and available and supported by the government in other countries. And when you begin to look at what are our priorities, many of our leaders are more interested in giving tax cuts to the rich and pandering to special interest groups so that they can make more money off of the poor. The only way we're going to change is we change our focus onto the people and look at the people and what needs to be done to make a more equitable situation and provide opportunities for the people to have success. Thank you for listening.